Welcome to the journey, a conversation on culture, leadership, and theology. My name is Vidal, and I want to welcome you guys again to this important conversation, just like any other podcast that we have had in the past. We're always grateful for your participation. Thank you for your viewership. Thank you for engaging with us, but thank you especially for subscribing. We see the rewards of simply bringing this conversation to you on a weekly basis. And I'll tell you what, the growth that we've been experiencing, I will attribute it, besides of God's grace, precisely to my guest and co-host. And I'm speaking of Dr. Ken Hugghins. Dr. Hugghins, it's good to have you again. How are you feeling on a Tuesday?
On a Tuesday, I am feeling great. It's cooler in Huntsville. In fact, I read a meme that said, look at the weather being all nice and sweet, like it didn't try to kill us 2 weeks ago. So a beautiful day here.
Well, I know it is beautiful. We are traveling to upstate North Texas in the next few days. And I tell you what, we are from deep South Texas. I'm in Mission, Texas, right by McAllen. So the drop of temperature for us has a little different effect from folks in the north. So anyways, we are ready for some cool, and this fall season is always good, and we're enjoying it. So it's good to have you, Brother Ken. Always good seeing you. You and we were having a quick conversation prior to clicking record for our podcast. And I wanna kind of just bounce a couple of ideas with you and see your thoughts and hear your thoughts over this issue, because one of the things that we get to do, and we're privileged to work with pastors across the state and even beyond the state of Texas. And the common denominator in pastoral ministry is that at 50 years of age, that's where I'm at. I'm at 50 years of age. I see my age group and older continue to grow. And I see the younger, which in this case, I'm looking at my kids, in their early 20s, not necessarily growing at the same rate as my age group and older, in a sense of vocational ministry. I was privileged to be a part of 140th anniversary at Primera Iglesia Bautista in Laredo, which historically is known as the first Hispanic Baptist work in the nation. And man, it was a celebration. Pastor Dorso Maciel, shout out to Brother Maciel. He's been there for 31 years. And Brother Ken, that type of experience and legacy is becoming more and more of a anomaly. I guess that's where I'm looking at. It is not as common as it used to in the past. So I guess part of my question to you, because I know you're coming from a fairly long tenure in your previous church. Remind me, was it 31 years?
31 years.
Yeah, so kind of the same thing as Pastor Dorso, except he is 84. And I know you're not there yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I guess part of my question to you is, how do you last 31 years at one place? How do you do that, ministry-wise?
They liked my wife. I've reflected on that just a little bit. Let's just say this. When I came, they had been without a pastor 9 months and were panicking. And it's very, very interesting. It was a former pastor who had been the pastor of my home church, and I'd got to know there just through my parents, that had recommended me. He'd recommended me 4 years before, but I'd never pastored. So they took a risk. During that time, they had purchased and paid off 12 and a half acres for relocation. When I came, we were ratting around like a pea in a can. I always said, gosh, we don't need bigger space. But within the next 5 years, we were having 3 services. And this was a small chapel-esque kind of facility, but we were having 3 services and found a way to move. I'll give you a heads up. I don't know a lot about the financial end of things, and we had some great retired businessmen, and one of them said, well, let's just find out what we're worth at the bank. And we were worth a loan of $600,000. So let's build what we can with that. Well, 1.2 mil later, with our people doing, if you can believe it or not, a lot of the finishing. It was a tilt wall construction, beautiful outfit, architect and tilt wall company worked together out of Fort Worth. But we finished it out. The next building we did about 10 years later, the folks said, no, we want to hire it all done. but Texas Baptist Builders had a lot to do with that too. They gave us 2 weeks, 3 weeks of their time.
Great.
But I've always said during that time, and I've taken this line from Dr. Gene Wilkes, who pastored Legacy Baptist or Legacy Church in Plano. It went through, I think, 2 or 3 names. And he was there 30 years, I guess. But I've taken this line from him. I've pastored 3 churches in the time that I was at Elkins. And I've always said we were trying to move into the 4th. We've been trying to for about 5 years. And a lot of that is shaped by what leadership do you have? We were a church of 200 to 300, varying in that over the years. What kind of leadership do you have? What blocks of people come in? We reached a lot of people through youth baseball at one time. A couple of personality, a couple of families involved in that, and they brought other families. We saw a real spike at the beginning when we brought on a youth minister, and that's a key thing. We had some young families, but very sharp professional families, and she dreamed a MOPS program, Mothers of Preschoolers. And we started that program and had a very successful ministry with that. Now, again, staff has to sustain it or help, and you have to lead budgeting processes to see, let's fund this or help with it. But, the church waxed and waned or changed through those kinds of things. And you really miss some leaders when they go, they die or they health-wise can't be as involved. University folks sometimes would move on to another place. And so I don't know, maybe the change. And there were some folks that left because of me. And after the fact, you find out there were folks that left for other reasons you weren't aware of. I do appreciate a couple of my folks have said, since I've left, I put a value on relationships over doctrine. Now, hear me carefully. I'm a committed Baptist and a committed evangelical conservative, but I'm not afraid to talk about things. And I always told our folks, don't be afraid of the questions. That's why I have all these books, not for answers, but so we can look at other believers who've wrestled with the same thing. And we may not come out with always what we've heard. What's God telling us in this time and place? And let's do it together. I tried to always affirm, acknowledge, accept, and model that all kinds of people. So, and that can mean a lot more challenging things today, but folks just felt welcome. I tried to set that pattern and seemed to have worked for a while.
Well, let me say this, and you gave me a perfect segue into be reminded, because 20 years ago, when I first met you in the classroom, in the academic level, doctrinal environment, because we were going through New Testament courses, yes, I can see that very easily, the relational component translated from the classroom into the church, into pastoral ministry, and obviously into life for that matter. But maybe, and again, I guess this is part of my question, sometimes for whatever reason, and I say whatever reason, but I know probably it's just bad stewardship and even bad theology or bad leadership, we create a dichotomy, a divorce between doctrine and relationships, where my understanding is that doctrine is relational. By nature is relational, because if doctrine is going to be just for a self-consumption, indulgence, acknowledgement, I just don't know if that's actually biblical and actually, true doctrine. But all that to say, because the phrase that you got from your folks at church, maybe if we can come back to this at a later podcast, but it's kind of the doctrine and the relationship component, kind of the two sides of the same coin. And for whatever personal experiences had in the past. And by the way, you kind of gave us the warning at the beginning, because we are in a time and age where not only doctrine has been compromised and forsaken. And I was having this conversation with somebody this week, and I reminded, again, just having casual conversation, that churches today, potentially, they might choose more networking with churches versus denominational relationships or affiliations, because in a lot of the networking, and I don't know if you find this true in your environment, but a lot of the networking has to do with vision, with I guess the word I'm looking for is affinity on the things they want to do versus doctrinal, distinctives.
Yeah.
And in my take, once again, this is just my humble opinion, why can we do both? Why can we just, and by the way, we're in October and this is Reformation Month, and speaking of doctrine, and but anyways, any thoughts on that on your end?
Yeah, and I would love to talk about it further at another time. The dynamics of Christian and church life are always intriguing to me, because as another one of your cooperative ministers and maybe to some degree mentor to you, like he was in many ways to me, Dr. Bob Utley, he always says truth in the scripture comes in tension,
dialectical pairs.
Dialectical. And maybe that was William Hendricks at Southwestern, that used to say it is tension-filled entities. Is Jesus God or man?
That's right.
Yes. Well, that doesn't compute in our fallenness. In reality, that's bigger than us. Apparently, some things that seem to be in tension to us are resolved more easily. So, in the course of history, I always talk about the law of the pendulum, where you have, we all want it to hang straight, but it doesn't, because we can't stand that tension of both and. So someone will want to emphasize one aspect of the Christian truth and swing the pendulum over here. And another pithy statement that I heard is, heresy is usually one aspect of the truth overemphasized. So, but somebody hones in on that aspect, and they're not happy with the attention it hasn't received, but whatever. So they swing it over this way. Well, then when there's going to be a reaction, and there will, it's going to swing all the way back over this way. And even when we talk about succession in churches, that's one thing to be careful of, for churches to be careful of. But so I've often said to my students, if you're feeling caught in the middle and getting shot at both sides, you're probably where Jesus was, and and just ask for strength, because people are going to want you to stand where they stand on those issues. And there again, if there's relationship, it's like, we can talk about these things and still keep doing ministry together, still keep walking together. I guess the other thing, Vidal, that I've said is I've described myself, and frankly, it was higher education that did this for me. I was raised a pretty provincial Southern Baptist. I mean, this is what we believe. This is what we do. Isn't it? The tension for me was always, how do I get this to make sense to other people? Besides telling them to come to church and pray a prayer and sing the songs we sing. And so, okay, yeah, there are other Christians, I suppose, and they do it differently. Well, education and church history and stuff taught me people don't do things for no reason. What are the reasons that have led to these different groups of Christianity? And then you begin to realize, well, that's interesting that they emphasize that. We don't emphasize that. That might be something to hold in tension. How can we bring a little bit that into our understanding of Christian faith? So I grew to say, I want to be tied to that slender thread of orthodoxy running through 2,000 years of Christian history. And the older I get, the slenderer it gets, but the firmer it gets.
You reminded me when you make reference to that tension, which I get the impression that is an unresolved tension, that sometimes whether we impose it or whether we are just so entitled that when we come to know Christ, our entitlement continues, because sanctification is not automatic, in a sense that, it's also that process. And I'm thinking that sometimes we as pastors and preachers, we make the mistake to somehow, whether it's intentional or naively, we communicate that if you come to know Christ, it's precisely so he can resolve the tension, which in my mind I'm thinking, well, not necessarily, because not only that we are in a Genesis 3 world, but for the most part, most of the suffering, especially in our side of the world, has been self-inflicted. It's just part of our brokenness and craziness. But all that to say is that would it be possible that we are called to live in the tension, and as we navigate tension field experiences, the reality of, again, this thing that sometimes pulls us through is precisely that we can depend on his on his reliability, that he is a trustworthy God, and that he's worthy of our trust in moments and scenarios where life makes no sense for whatsoever. So again, I guess ministry and pastoral ministry is filled with those experiences, and obviously the scripture is as well on that. And I want to ask you, because again, we began our conversation talking about the tenure of some of these churches and pastoral ministry. I had the privilege this morning to do some podcasting as well with one of my good friends, and also long tenure, and just talking about this type of conversations. In your case, you have a very unique experience, Dr. Hugghins, besides the fact that you have been, or you were there for 31 years, but in your transition, coming out of retirement, and after 31 years, you have chosen to stay in the same church where you pastored for 31 years. And that's a unique experience for multiple reasons. But my question to you is, what would you consider the pros and the cons of staying in the same church? But by the way, before you answer the question, I'd like for you to think about this as you answer. I'd like for you to think about this. One is, I'm thinking of Pastor Dorso Maciel at Primera in Laredo, which, he's probably in that stage of, so think about if you were to talk to him in that regard. But the other one is, I got a couple of friends, very close friends of mine, that we went to school together, and that they are going, or have gone, or they're going through the transition of taking over a pastoral ministry where the pastor is staying in the same church. So if you can think in your mind right now, as you answer the question in these two scenarios, the one who's leaving, staying, and the one who's coming to continue the ministry, but the predecessor is going to stay in the church. Any thoughts?
Very interesting to put it in. What would I do if I went into a church where the long tenured pastor stayed? I have seen it on the surface work well. We were members at First Baptist Arlington when we first married, and were members there for 6 years while I was doing doctoral work, and served in the college ministry almost all that time. And Dr. Charles Wade followed Dr. Hennard East, and Dr. East stayed in the church. And far as I knew, now, it's a large church. I've heard others in the denomination, and there's a tremendous resource in our denomination, by the way, our state denomination, Baptist General Convention of Texas, or Texas Baptists. It's an intentional interim program, and whether you plan to use it or not, talk to Carl Fickling and those people about transitions. And he said For 10 that did it, he'd seen maybe one or two that it actually worked out well, or maybe there was more tension in some of these. It was not ugly, but sure. I know of other churches in our state, it did not work well. And the next pastor that came found himself, I've enjoyed enough of this. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
There's several dynamics in my transition, and it's interesting as you talk about Brother Maciel and myself. Yeah, I was 67 when I retired, 68. I could have stayed on. The church was happy. I was fairly burnt out. We had gone through a very painful betrayal by a staff member and embezzlement. And that was a lot of work to track all that down over. She'd been there 20 years. She'd been doing it less than that. And that it's easy to beat myself up over that, but we have committees. I mean, that is not my strong suit.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the weakness of relational compassion. And, I was like, do your job. We're in trust here. Do your job. She was doing some things that were very essential for us. She had earned a lot of trust and from some key people that kind of gave their imprimatur on her. But nonetheless, that was a very difficult thing. Then we went into COVID, and that was a challenging thing. But I had already been thinking about retiring before either of those. In fact, I'd begun talking with the chairman of the personnel committee, who was a good friend. And so when that was done, I was about done. And my father's 93 now. My sister's his sole caregiver, so she needed some help. My mother-in-law was still alive and living with us. Anyway, and I just felt it's time in terms of the next chapter of the church. We'd been trying for 5 years. I hadn't sold whatever it is I thought we needed to do well. Didn't see much movement that direction. It's time. Let someone else do it. And I think that's another way that maybe I'm different. The relational aspect, I've always said, we don't have to all see it the same way, and you don't all have to see it the way I do. In fact, there are times we haven't gone in directions that I thought would have been best. Okay, that's not where the church is. Or I could say, yeah, there are things we should do, or there are things some of our people want to do, but I don't think the church is ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There again, a tension between consensus building and then leadership that sometimes plows ahead, and that is always a delicate balance, tension. So, I really encourage the church. In fact, if I'm working with this one personnel chair, I mean, we started meeting with Carl Fickling and let him meet him and hear. It's always stunning to me. This man is he's in his late 70s. He's a psychiatrist, retired psychiatrist, lifelong Baptist. It's amazing to me what our people don't know about what really goes on with church or transition in churches, or what staff experience. So anyway, Dr. Fickling got to tell him some of those things. And so he led personnel and the church to, let's go the intentional interim route. Now understand at this point, I'm out of here. I mean, even in the transition, I'm not, I know what I would like to see happen, but you don't want them blaming it on you. And you don't want to interfere with what God may just want to do. But they did select the intentional interim that I was very pleased with, similar theologically, relationally. led them through a year and a half. They began looking at resumes, and it was a bit frightening. I mean, just what was out there. There was a young man who, when he was in college here in Huntsville, his family had been very active at First Baptist of Huntsville. His dad had been music minister there while he taught at the university. That church went through some difficult times, so they were fairly wounded there. Nonetheless, the young man began coming to me, visiting with me. He took a position with a non-denominational church about 45 minutes away, and was youth minister on the weekends, counseling through that. He counseled him through, mentored whatever friends through his Sam Houston experience, his Truett Theological Seminary experience, where he continued to work at that church. As he came out of that, he took a pastorate in South Carolina, North Carolina, and he'd been there about 3 years. And I just, my prayer was, God, bring him back. But there again, there's more going on than I know. Mm-hmm. One day, one of the committee texted me and said, "Who was that friend of yours?" Well, I mean, our church had licensed him. Our church had ordained him. Our people knew him. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can get you the information about his church. There again, I really stayed out of it. And Dr. Fickling was wise to say, if we stayed in the church, and I'll talk about reasons we did, don't go to business meetings. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Don't be extra involved in a lot of things, which frankly, I was delighted not to do. Like I say, I was tired of what I understood was needed to run church. I might do things a little differently now that I stepped away from it for a while.
Okay.
Wouldn't we all? But nonetheless, they began to pursue him. He called me and let me know he might be coming, and I talked to him a little bit about it, and God worked from there, and he's here. And so a young man that I consider a friend, that I enjoy talking about God, the world, and related matters with, bright, relational. He's our pastor. And he asked me to preach. I guess it was when his second child was born here recently. First time I'd been in the pulpit in 2 years. And
how did that feel?
I'll be honest, Vidal. I'm some of it may be dysfunctional. Number one, I'm codependent. I want other people to feel okay. Number two, I think I moved so much as a child. I just kind of learned to put my feelings aside. Anyway, it was fun. It was fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I didn't feel any sense of possession. And afterwards, some people were like, God, that was good. It was just something familiar. I said, well, yeah, it was familiar, But I did the worship service as he does it. He changed some things, order, pieces in it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to, and I made a point to say our pastor when talking of him.
That's right.
So, good news is I really 5-6 months after I retired, and I'll be honest, I decompressed for 5 or 6 months. I didn't go anywhere worship wise. And I tease my people and say, I watched a bunch of y'all do that during COVID. I want to see what it felt like. So, and I needed the decompression, I call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I was asked to do a supply for a church in kind of a transition, and ended up asking me just to do a preaching interim, which I was happy to do. Did that for about 10 months.
Yeah.
And our folks were like, well, why ain't he preaching here, kind of thing? Because there's more to it than just the preaching. But
Right. That's right. That is true. That is true. So let me
Sure.
just ask you, because I'm processing everything you're giving us, and I'm trying to think in blocks of how you come to the realization or to the experience that, for what I'm getting and what I have seen in the last few weeks that we have reconnected, because I haven't talked to you in a while since my seminary days, is that it's been a good experience. The question is, how did you get there? Because again, tragically, in most scenarios, it is not a good experience when not only the transition of retirement for the church that typically doesn't know what to do. The other thing is, less and less pastors are finishing the race well. And that's also a very difficult thing. So part of it for me, just listening to your story, is that you finished the race well. And I think part of that creates the opportunity to see God taking ownership on the quote unquote consequences of the retirement, what is to come. Because your retirement after 31 years, I can only imagine, creates uncertainty not only for you as a pastor, in a sense that you're moving and stepping into a new phase in life that you have never been before, especially after all these decades of pastoral ministry. But the other thing that creates that uncertainty is for the church. And churches typically either panic or don't know what to do. And their structure, their theology, their DNA is going to come to the surface, because that's what happens when we are under pressure. Our real selves are coming to the surface. So just a quick kind of help me to see if I outlining or thinking on those blocks correctly. Number one is that what I heard from you is that you came to the realization, basically, for whatever experiences, whether it was with a previous staff member that did not go well, and then COVID, that basically you were coming to the place where you said, okay, I know I was getting close to retirement, but this is going to really move me into that final decision.
Right.
So is that decision that a lot of us, whether it's, and again, I don't know, this might sound a little prejudiced, whether it's pastoral ministry, men, the way we process, find our identity in what we do vocationally. And I know for ministries, it's a calling, but tragically, a lot of pastoral ministry, Dr. Hugghins, and you know this as well, working and serving pastors that you've done for so many years through seminary, ministry can be lonely. And leadership is lonely. Tragically, we're not very successful as pastors many times on reproducing ourselves. And so in this case, you recognize that it was time. So you made a decision before anything else at a personal level. The other thing that I'm getting from you is, which again, I'm thinking of pastors who are retiring in that season, or those who are taking over, scenarios where they're taking over a retirement experience, but the pastor is going to stay there. The other thing is that in the transition, you and the church brought an objective, outside of the church, consultation, leadership, guidance. So it wasn't just among yourselves, because the way I understood your story, you actually stepped down and you led the church basically in the hands of this transition of intentional interim, which was extremely important. And that's not easy to do. So again, those two things.
I had set that up, made sure that was in place. Now the church still needed to vote on to do it or not.
Sure.
I knew the leadership proposing it.
Yeah, but it was something that obviously you initiated, and you went after. Which, by the way, just a quick parenthesis, and I know this sounds like I'm promoting my own deal in a sense that, because I serve for Texas Baptist, this is where denominational work really becomes a blessing in many other ways. But just resources, again, just the wisdom of some of these brothers and ladies that they have been on the field and doing this and seen so many scenarios. And this is the encouragement that we give and bring to pastors and churches today. Find that network of churches, of individuals that can potentially help us and guide us through this. The other thing, Dr. Hugghins, the other blog that I'm getting from you on the story is, it feels to me that you came to the realization or to the place where priorities, and your dad, been at the age that he was or is today, sister taking care of dad, and the need of, and not just need, but the desire. I always tell people that you don't have to, is that you get to help, care for. And
Exactly.
that implies, a set of priorities in that life. And then obviously enjoying your own kids and your grandkids now. And
Right.
so anyways, I guess, those are some of the blogs that you might consider and think about, as a process of succession. Let me move you into one final question for our podcast today, because we're talking about this process of not only retiring or succession, but in this case, how do you do it in a healthy manner, especially if you're going to stay in the same church, which by the way, huge parenthesis for me on this deal. I just saw it in Laredo as well, which is kind of it's just part of the package, because as pastors, we don't pastor by ourselves. We got a wife and we got kids and grandkids. How much of this component, Dr. Hugghins, is the fact that this is your church and is your family's church? So whether it's wife and kids or even grandkids, in many cases, I'm speaking from the sense of staying in the same church that helps your family to transition, because in your case, I know you guys are empty nesters, but did that also help for your wife on the transition and the fact that you guys are at the same church?
Absolutely. And my wife's mother was alive as well. And it's just become, I mean, she moved here in one Thanksgiving weekend. We went to the home she lived in for 50 years. The home my father-in-law was, the house he was born in. We went there in one weekend. She's tough. We packed up everything that she wanted to keep, brought it here, put it in storage. She moves in with us. So she was with us for 5 years. And our church was her home. That was an important part of her life. And it was exciting to be able to share that with her. I always said my father-in-law was a nominal Methodist, but a highly spiritual Aggie, Texas A&M graduate. And that had been their priority over the years. But she came from Baptist roots, and it was good to connect in a healthy way. My wife teaches a Sunday school class, a women's class, and has for years. It's funny to reflect on our being senior adults now. And senior adults been doing their classes. But nonetheless, it would have been very, very difficult to move them. And even my wife now, she still works in the community at her accounting job, that firm that she works with. So, and they don't do change well. My wife doesn't. And her family, her mother was a trooper. And that was never really a consideration, because we are centrally located with our kids. But as I say, not in each other's backyards. That works for some families. I don't know that it would for us. My dad, is an hour away. So the location is good. We do not want to uproot. Pam, she still has the network, although she accepted very readily. Pam, no, don't go to the business meeting. And she's expressed, I don't like the way they're doing this. Well, one thing I had to decide is, this is God's church. And I'd said it all along. Now I had to decide if I really believed it. And yeah, it is,
always had been. Yeah.
He's got this. And so far I'm very pleased with, has the young man made, he's 29. A pastor of 67 to someone 29. But as they reminded each other, I was only 33 when I came, so, and I had not pastored. He's at least pastored. So he's great. Did he change the worship service from what I did? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he change? He made a decision about some staff. I wouldn't have. I had talked with him about it. I would have handled it the way he did. It really doesn't matter.
Right. That's
It's
right.
not my dog in the fight. I
Yeah.
want the church to do well. So let me say a couple things, kind of in conclusion. Number one, I encourage him every way I can. In fact, it occurred to me as I knew we'd be talking something about this today. I need to find some reason to text him every week. I did not want to crowd him. I did not want to be visiting with him all the time for fear folks would see him with me and think I'm still tinkering.
Hmm.
I think things are secure enough now. He and I do what we want to do.
Mhm.
But I want him to know, doesn't matter whether I agree with you or not. I got your back.
Hmm.
I got your back. And I'm praying for you. And we're close enough to where if I think something's really to warn you, I think I can do that.
Mhm.
But it won't be over every nickel and dime thing.
Mhm.
So if I was coming into a place that had a previous pastor, I would do everything I could to build a relationship with that pastor.
Hmm.
Don't let him think I'm going to be his lap boy. Also be sensitive. How much is he resenting, hanging on to, but be sure to honor him publicly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, Andrew has known me as a mentor, and he's never had my classes, but every now and then he'll say, as I've heard Dr. Hugghins say, well, I mean, thank you for throwing me a bone. Thank you, though, for building into continuity.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't have to come. And he's confident enough in himself. He's going to do what God leads him to do. But he had always said, I was like, do you think you'd ever want to come back to Huntsville where you grew up? He said, there's only one church I'd ever want to pastor if I did. I was like, well, I'm not leaving yet. So, well, it was time to leave. Isn't that great that God worked that out?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've decided I do not have to, and it's good. I was gone that first 6 months. I was gone then for the 9 months interim. I've been doing some preaching,
Mhm.
uh, even in a local church where some of our members left to go to. They have invited me back in their time of interim and may do an interim there. Um, so I tell him when I'm going to be out. I
Mhm.
just find somebody to say, hey, I'm going to be out this coming Sunday. We're going to Austin to be with our grandson's third birthday party. Sorry, that comes first, and that's what I'm free to do now. But know that I'm not staying away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and so far it's working okay. Actually, he did, and he's clever enough that he did say, yeah, they told me at seminary, if you go where the ex-pastor is, he'll either be your greatest cheerleader or he'll be leading the uprising against you, the coup against you. And I said, and I shared that with the people that first Sunday I preached. And I said, and I told him, I'm not decided yet.
We'll let you know once I decide. We'll
That's
let you
right.
know
That's right. You got a few
which
months.
way I'm going. Hey, man, this is just again creating different scenarios in my mind for multiple reasons, but one of them is maybe just maybe in the future we might want to invite Andrew to come and join us and maybe expand on the conversation and get his side of the conversation as the one coming into the opportunity to lead and to pastor a church where the previous pastor stays. But I'll say this, and just reflecting on the wisdom that you have shared with us today, man, I don't know, and you might need to, you don't have to answer the question now, but you might want to think about it. Maybe in the next time that we get together, we can talk about it. But if we were to have this conversation, meaning the topic of succession, staying, maybe leaving to another church, or just leaving after retirement, maybe when you were 55, maybe 60 years of age, because even though you knew and you were talking or you were thinking about it, but this type of conversations when you are 55, 60 years of age, or even younger, creates a sense of accountability. And I just get the impression that this is a lot easier to have this conversation because, number one, we're looking at this experience of retirement from a rear view mirror. It already happened. It's irreversible. You're done. I mean, you can always go and pastor again, but I guess, you're done. And it's a lot easier to celebrate and to see the goodness of God. But in reality, most of us as pastors, we are not thinking about it in that sense. Most of us, for whatever reasons, churches are not structured to really have this type of conversations, which, by the way, within the BGCT and Texas Baptist, I just heard one of my fellow pastors here in South Texas, which is taking advantage of this, and this is why I'm bringing it up. Texas Baptist offers a sabbatical stimulus or sabbatical financial package or help for churches to have these conversations of decompressing for pastors, maybe not for retirement, but so they can make it to retirement, right? And take those necessary breaks on that. Anyways, Dr. Hugghins, again, in my mind, I mean, Andrew, 29, many of our young pastors, they're going to have this conversation now. What's the plan? How are we going to move? The church needs to have this conversation. Right. And hopefully.
And it's interesting. You don't want to bring it up too early because you don't want folks to start thinking you're leaving.
Yeah, you're not going to stay.
Or you don't want a group that would like to see you leave take hold of it and start pushing. I was so fortunate. Our church had good relationships. Mm-hmm. And I weathered a couple of real storms and was told in a previous ministry staff position, you're either putting in or withdrawing coin in the bank.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you got to draw a bunch, you better make sure you've got some stored up.
That's right.
And we went through a staff member we had to let go. And it wasn't one of those things where you could point to immorality or illegality. It's just he was toxic. Mm-hmm. But not everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. And anyway, we weathered that, and I was delightfully stunned. But all that to say, it is a good church, and I don't think there were anyone to elbow me out. But I think good leadership is begin to at least your leadership team, people mm-hmm. behind the scenes, begin thinking about it. Because if you've been there a long time, nobody's thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And most, God, this sounds so arrogant, but most don't really have a clue. I spent some time talking with our personnel committee as the transition was going on. Here are things to understand. You're going to get flooded with a lot of resumes. Mm-hmm. How do you cull them? Here's some things to watch out for in the quote denominational wars. Mm-hmm. My watch out for the extremes on either end, So I think a good pastor can prepare people that way without, launching their retirement.
Exactly. Well, and again, this is just such a natural conversation because, his name is William Vanderbloom, and he leads a ministry where they work in all this. What's the name of the ministry? Well, they find, or they help churches find staff members, pastors, churches. But the point is that he wrote a book that is called Next. And in his book, he begins with the first sentence that says, every pastor is an interim pastor. There are no permanent pastors, which, you read that and you're like, well, yeah. Now, the problem is, as true as that statement might be, the issue is that most of us, we do not lead like that. We lead typically, we pastor as if we're there to stay permanently. And that's where we run into trouble sometimes. And again, this is the beginning of our conversation. We will like to continue this because in my mind, I'm thinking, Dr. Hugghins, what about the cases where it did not work? What are some of the factors may not work and have not worked? And some scenarios have gone really bad, and the churches, the kingdom suffers. People get discouraged, and it just gets messy sometimes. And ultimately, as much as you use the term that the church was blessed, in reality is the combination of the divine intervention of the sovereignty and the mercy of God over your people and your folks as a church, the investment of 31 years, ups and downs in that investment, and yet God has honored the faithfulness that you have shown with your family, not only to God, but to the ministry. And now it simply was the time to pass on the baton to the next generation. And we want to make sure that what we're passing on is precisely the non-negotiable foundations of gospel presentation. Let's just, focus on what truly, really matters. Secondary, tertiary issues can potentially be negotiated. And with new leadership, guess what? They will be negotiated. So get ready because, obviously Andrew is not Dr. Hugghins and Dr. Hugghins is not Andrew. So it's just part of the dynamics. And yet the presence of God, the mercy of God has bestowed upon the church, and may the Lord continue to do that. So when my son Josue is interviewing Andrew after his retirement, when they both are our ages, hopefully this podcast repeats all over again, after 31 years of ministry or whatever the case may be. That's our plea before the Lord, right? That's what we want to pray and ask the Lord Jesus. I enjoy our conversations with you, a lot of wisdom and definitely personal testimonies and experience. We appreciate your vulnerability to bring up your journey in ministry. And obviously we have a lot in common in a sense of our passion, our zeal for the gospel. And as we see the church moving forward, this is extremely, extremely important. So Dr. Hugghins, we will see you next time. We'll continue our conversation. And this is just the beginning. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. God's peace.